Today, Bitcoin's back in the green as ETF excitement continues to build. Galaxy Digital says those potential ETFs could bring billions in new investments into Bitcoin. And Liz Lopatto of The Verge reacts to the news that Sam Bankman-Fried will testify at his trial. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. It's another day of gains for digital currencies, with Bitcoin getting a nice boost of about 3% by noon Eastern and maintaining the $34,000 mark. Meanwhile, Ether rose 1.5% and crossed $1,800, and Solana still outperforming, jumping 8% to above $33. Let's get to the latest headlines. New research from Galaxy Digital says spot Bitcoin ETFs could drive a surge of new inflows into Bitcoin. Galaxy says the industry could see $14.4 billion in inflows during the first year of trading. That would be driven by advisors opening half of their assets under management to allow access in 1 year, while broker-dealers and banks could allocate 25%. The note also predicts that spot ETFs can draw over $26 billion by the second year and nearly $39 billion by year 3. Of course, the growing excitement among investors for these potential spot ETFs have driven huge gains in Bitcoin's price in recent days. Next, bankrupt crypto lender Genesis says a New York civil fraud suit could shift its bankruptcy plans. Reuters reports that Genesis wants to propose a no-deal bankruptcy plan, which would let it distribute its crypto assets to customers and still let it keep litigation claims against parent company Digital Currency Group and others. This lawsuit from New York State AG Letitia James alleges that Genesis, DCG, and partner company Gemini defrauded customers in a billion-dollar scheme. If that lawsuit goes through, all three companies would be banned from the financial industry in New York. All right, let's talk about the SBF trial for our main story. Trial has been on hold for a week, and the defense is set to kick off witness testimony this week. And we just found out today that Sam Bankman-Fried himself is among those witnesses. Now, there's a lot that's happened in the trial so far, so Crypto World's Jordan Smith spoke to Liz Lopatto, senior reporter at The Verge. She's been in the courtroom each day and shares her reaction to the trial so far and to the news that SBF will take the stand.
Thank you so much for being here at this time. We're sort of at the halfway mark of the SBF trial, and we've been on a week-long break since the prosecution called its last witness. So I'm now calling on you to sort of give me a take on the temperature in the room right now on how the trial is going so far. How is it going? How do you feel SBF's defense has done in this trial? Where does he sort of stand?
It's not looking great for the defense. I have to be honest with you. I was expecting more because very early on, right before we did jury selection, the judge asked if there had been an offer of a plea deal. And the prosecutor said, we wanted to see if they wanted to open discussions, and the defense said no. At which point I was like, oh, okay, like they must have a pretty strong case if they didn't even want to negotiate about a plea deal. And then we got to the cross-examinations, and I kept expecting there to be more fireworks, and we really didn't get them. I don't think they managed to take a chip out of Caroline Ellison, who is really the star witness in this case. They managed to make Nishad Singh look a little bit self-serving, but not necessarily totally unreliable. And Gary Wong also did pretty well under cross. And like, those are the accused co-conspirators who are all pointing a finger at Sam saying, yeah, he was in it. We did this all together. And they've all pled guilty. On top of that, you have Sam's college roommate, Adam Yedidia, testifying with an immunity deal, saying, yeah, he knew as in September that things were not going to be right. And of course, we now have evidence of him falsely reassuring the public that things were fine with FTX. So that all looks bad. But what I really wasn't prepared for was how many more bad things were going to come out. You have Nishad Singh talking about loans that weren't loans. So that sounds like classic embezzlement. You've got the 7 fake balance sheets from Caroline Ellison. Like, one fake balance sheet, maybe you call your lawyer. 7 fake balance sheets is jail. So, every time somebody got on the stand, it just got worse for Sam. And maybe one of the more dramatic moments that was also a little bit bloodless was former FTX lawyer Can's son getting up on the stand and saying that Sam had asked him if there was a way to justify the missing money. And Sun sort of ran through 3 ways and said none of them did it. But then after that, we saw Sam using some of the justifications that Sun had given him in an interview with Good Morning America. So it looks bad.
Yeah, there are so many threads to pull there. I actually want to stick with your characterization of the defense, because I was watching some of your reporting coming out of the courtroom, and I think the phrase that stuck out to me was meandering and confused when talking about just how his defense was approaching this case so far. And I think one of the points you made was they started to sort of wake up toward the end of the prosecution's witnesses. But how do you think they're poised to head into this second phase of the trial, where they're starting to call their own witnesses? Do you think they're in a stronger position, or are sort of clearer headed in terms of what their argument is going to be, or are we just right back at the start of the trial where we just weren't sure what the argument is?
At this point, I think it's damage control. You know, throughout the cross examinations, it hasn't felt like there was a very strong narrative coming from the defense. And that was that was a fairly drastic contrast to the prosecution, which had, figured out narrative peaks and valleys. They had set up witnesses in such a way that a witness would testify to something and then a co-conspirator would come on and be like, ha, 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 we definitely lied about that. So we had this really strong narrative coming from the prosecution that we didn't get from the defense at all. And one of the things that kept happening was that the defense would start to build towards something. And I'd be like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then they drop it. And, the inability to put things in chronological order so that it was easy for the jury to follow really made it difficult, I think, for a lot of us to follow what the defense was trying to do. And I'll grant you that confusing the issue might potentially raise some reasonable doubt, but you do need to confuse the issue with respect to witnesses, not with respect to what you're trying to say yourself if you're the defense. So I think they're in a very vulnerable position. And I'm curious to see what they're going to do when they put on their case, because, they have only a couple of witnesses in Sam. And how do you overcome what has been, I think, a very strong case from the prosecution?
Yeah, I want to talk about that confusion you mentioned in just a second, but I also want to talk about what you just mentioned, is that we found out this morning that Sam Bankman-Fried is going to take the stand. What's your reaction to that decision? Do you think that's the right decision for him, given everything we've learned so far? And I guess, what was the tipping point there? Do you think that there was particular testimony, be it Caroline Ellison or Nishad Singh, that sort of said to him that he needs to take the stand and say something?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. Given Sam's propensity for talking when he probably shouldn't, which we all saw after the fall of FTX, I assumed he was always going to take the stand. There was for a while, the defense was playing coy about this, but I don't think there was a world in which Sam didn't want to tell his story. And I think part of that has to do with he's been very convincing for a lot of people for a long time at getting them to give up their money. And so I think he probably believes that he's going to continue to be convincing, and maybe he can talk the jury into seeing things from his perspective. So we're going to see that. I have to say, though, I don't know what he can say that's going to undo, the testimony of the people who are closest in the world to him. Because I want to be clear, these are not, usually in a business case, these are people you work with. And in his case, this is two college roommates, his ex-girlfriend, and someone who's known him since high school. These are not casual people. These are not coworkers or solely coworkers. These are the people who, he's very, very close to. And that in and of itself is something that I think makes their testimony much more dramatic. Having that personal element, these are his roommates, several of them were living together. I don't know how you get around that. I don't know how you explain that all of them conspired together to lie about you, because that's essentially what he has to say here, or that the state pressured them into, testifying against him, which in the case of Gary Wang, Gary Wang flew back to the United States a week after the FTX collapsed and was talking to prosecutors the next day. There wasn't a case yet. That doesn't look great.
There was a point you made at the start of this trial on the Verge cast, which is that this trial could potentially have negative effects on the perception of crypto as a whole. And I've asked that point to a bunch of different insiders in crypto, and they've sort of pushed back and said this is really about SBF. The rest of the industry isn't like that, and it's a good thing we're getting him out.
Sounds like they've got great PR.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious now that we're heading into the second phase of the trial. Where do you think that argument stands? I mean, everybody's still paying attention to the trial. I think they still associate SBF with crypto. So, how removed is this trial from the industry as a whole?
I think it's less removed than a lot of insiders would like for it to be. Like, certainly there is a party line that SBF was off on his own. He was doing his own thing. But if you think about Gary Wang's testimony about the insurance fund and about the faked numbers behind the insurance fund, I was sitting next to a crypto investor when that happened, and he was like, oh, I wonder if Binance's insurance fund is real. Right. Every time someone says something that we've heard from SBF before about, for instance, welcoming regulation, the question is, really? I think he's really muddied the waters for the crypto industry a lot more than they would like. And I know people are very excited about the possibility of like a Bitcoin ETF and sort of getting the traditional finance people involved. And I think a lot of them are going to be pretty gun shy after this because Sam's rhetoric wasn't that different from rhetoric that we were hearing from other people in the industry. And so knowing that he was lying, and not like lying a little, but like lying a lot, making up numbers for an insurance fund that didn't exist, for instance, it doesn't look good for everybody else, if only because even if you are actually doing the right thing, the fact that somebody else has been lying about doing the right thing automatically makes outsiders much more skeptical.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.